Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Labs, the channel where we deeply analyze the ideas, narratives, and strategies behind the documents. We are Sarah and Mark. Today, we're going to dive into the material we have on the table. Before we start, please leave a like, share the episode, subscribe to the channel, and remember to check the description for the links to access the original material.
Thank you so much for joining us again.
So I want you to imagine for just a second that you're standing in the middle of this really crowded, high-end diplomatic reception.
Okay.
You know the type. You've got the clinking of champagne glasses. There's that soft hum of string music playing in the background.
Right. Very elegant.
Exactly. Diplomats are exchanging polite smiles, maybe discussing international trade or some recent cultural exchange program.
It's a normal Tuesday in Geneva or London.
Yeah, exactly. And on the surface, it is just the absolute picture of refined, tranquil international relations. And think about this. What if you could put on a pair of glasses that allowed you to see the invisible architecture of that room? Oh, that's a fascinating way to look at it.
Right. Suddenly, you wouldn't just see a polite conversation about trade. You would see a highly trained intelligence operative reading the microscopic facial twitches of a foreign finance minister.
Yes.
You'd see the subtle nudging of a geopolitical narrative, or the quiet interception of data happening on a phone in someone's pocket.
The planting of an idea.
Exactly. The planting of an idea that's going to alter a nation's military policy, like 3 months from now.
Yep.
Basically, you would see a battlefield where not a single shot is ever fired.
It is a remarkable visualization, honestly. And it completely shatters the illusion most of us hold about how global power actually operates.
Totally.
Because we are so conditioned by, well, history books and, cinematic portrayals to equate national power with visibility.
Oh, yeah. Hollywood has completely warped our sense of this.
Right. We look for the aircraft carriers or the massive troop deployments or those really loud political ultimatums on the news.
The explosions, the high-speed chases. But the reality of true, enduring influence is often completely silent.
And that silent influence is exactly what we are dissecting today. We are taking a massive deep dive into a profoundly revealing book by Edward H. Whitmore. It's titled The Silent Empire: Precision, Influence, and the Intelligence Power That Shapes Global Events.
It's an incredible piece of analysis.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to essentially strip away that Hollywood veneer entirely. We are looking way past cloak and dagger spy fantasies, the gadgets, the rogue agents jumping out of helicopters.
None of that is real.
Right. We are going to uncover the actual functional reality of British intelligence. We want to explore how the United Kingdom has managed to operate as this invisible empire, yielding outsized global power not through brute force, but through surgical precision, excruciating patience, and just a total mastery of subtle influence.
And for you listening, whether you are analyzing global markets or studying historical trends, or even just trying to navigate the complex social dynamics of a corporate boardroom, understanding this philosophy is an absolute masterclass in strategy.
Oh, absolutely. It applies to so much more than just geopolitics.
It does, because we live in an era characterized by overwhelming information overload and incredibly loud, chaotic global conflicts.
Yeah, everyone is just shouting.
Exactly. So watching how quiet, precise knowledge is weaponized to shape history teaches a fundamental lesson. The most devastating and effective strategic moves are almost always the ones that your opponent never even perceives as an attack.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the central, anchoring philosophy of Whitmore's entire text. Because Whitmore isn't just saying that British intelligence is, good at being sneaky.
No, it's much deeper than that.
Right, he makes a much deeper structural claim. He argues that for the UK, precision is not merely a tactic. It's not just a tool they pull out of a toolkit when the situation calls for it.
It's their core philosophy.
Yes, it is their guiding philosophy. It is the literal DNA of their entire operational architecture.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the contrast becomes incredibly stark. To truly understand the British doctrine of precision, you have to look at the other major players on the global intelligence chessboard.
Like during the Cold War.
Exactly, particularly the Cold War. Look at the Soviet KGB, for example.
Oh, man. Their approach was terrifying.
It was. Their fundamental philosophy was rooted in mass surveillance and numerical superiority. It was an intelligence saturation model.
They just wanted to know everything about everyone.
Right. They relied on sheer volume sweeping up everyone and everything, utilizing literally millions of informants and applying brute psychological and physical pressure.
It's a dragnet approach. Just scoop up the entire ocean to find a few specific fish.
Precisely. And then contrast that with the United States intelligence apparatus during certain periods of the mid to late 20th century.
We were pretty loud, too.
Yes. The U.S. often favored massive, heavily funded, and ultimately very loud, overt actions.
Like funding large proxy armies.
Funding proxy armies, orchestrating highly visible coups, utilizing overwhelming technological sweeps. The American footprint was massive.
Yeah, very undeniable.
But the UK recognized a fundamental truth about power. Power that is wielded loudly inevitably incites friction, reaction, and long-term resistance.
This makes sense.
If you swing a sledgehammer, you don't just hit the nail, you crack the foundation, and everyone in the neighborhood hears the impact.
So their entire ethos became about minimizing that collateral damage. It's the difference between relying on sheer kinetic force and, well, mastering the element of timing.
Timing is everything.
Right. Instead of forcing a geopolitical outcome through massive pressure, it's about recognizing the exact moment a system is vulnerable and applying a single exquisitely timed nudge.
Exactly. It is an economy of force. I mean, why spend billions of dollars and risk international condemnation to topple a regime if you can quietly compromise the communications of three key generals and just let the regime's own internal paranoia do the work for you?
It's so much more elegant, which perfectly sets up one of the most operationally tense concepts Whitmore details in the book. He calls them pre-authorization maneuvers.
Oh, this part of the book is brilliant.
It is. He describes operatives working in what he calls the gray twilight zone. And this, frankly, blew my mind when I read it.
Because it goes against everything we think about government work.
Completely. It contradicts the entire idea of a strict rules-based bureaucracy. This is the liminal space where an intelligence operation has to actively begin before it officially exists on paper.
Right.
Because, as Whitmore points out, official government channels, oversight committees, political red tape, they move at a glacial pace.
And geopolitical crises do not wait for committee hearings.
They really don't.
The window of opportunity to insert an asset or intercept a critical piece of data might be open for 48 hours, or sometimes just a few hours.
Yeah.
If an operative waits for a formal piece of paper signed by Whitehall, the target has already moved, the data is encrypted, or the meeting is ended. The opportunity is gone forever.
Whitmore gives these incredibly vivid, granular examples of how this twilight zone actually functions. Like, he details a scenario with an operative in a busy London railway station.
Right, the surveillance device example.
Yes, this individual has a highly sensitive, concealed surveillance device. And the ultimate mission is to insert this device deep inside the diplomatic enclave of a hostile foreign embassy.
A massive breach of sovereignty.
Exactly. But the political green light, the official authorization to actually breach that sovereign territory, has not arrived yet.
So they cannot execute the final step.
Right. But they can't just sit in a pub and wait for the phone to ring either, because the logistical setup takes days.
It requires immense preparation.
So the operative begins to move. They start simulating the entire unfolding of the operation. They establish their transient identities. They coordinate with local assets to map the target's security rotations.
Getting the pieces on the board.
Exactly. They physically position themselves miles away, then blocks away, getting every single piece of the puzzle perfectly aligned. Whitmore shares another example of an agent in Istanbul who is tasked with placing a tracking bug.
Another great example.
To prep the ground before authorization, they spend days creating a flawless cover story as a local maintenance contractor. They secure the uniforms, they map the electrical grid of the building, and they get right up to the door.
They're essentially holding their breath. They're living in a state of suspended operational animation.
It has to be exhausting.
The psychological tension required to operate in that space is staggering. You have individuals working entirely on instinct, reading fragmented, real-time intelligence.
Yeah.
And they know that if the political wind changes, the operation will be aborted. But if they aren't perfectly positioned when the green light flashes, they will fail the mission.
But I really have to push back on this, because reading through those chapters, it sounds like an absolute recipe for a geopolitical disaster.
It does carry immense risk.
Right. If the whole philosophy is based on precision and avoiding loud mistakes, doesn't this pre-authorization strategy completely undermine that? I mean, what happens if that single operative in Istanbul misjudges the situation?
That's the million-dollar question.
What if they misread a diplomatic calendar or a security guard changes their rotation unexpectedly and the operative gets caught practically holding the bug before the government has even signed off? Couldn't they accidentally trigger the exact kind of international incident they are trying so hard to avoid?
It is the most critical vulnerability in the doctrine, and to his credit, Whitmore doesn't shy away from it.
Good, because it seems glaring.
But the key to understanding why this doesn't regularly result in catastrophic blowback is understanding the invisible safety nets.
Okay, explain that.
This isn't a Hollywood movie where a lone wolf goes rogue and improvises a mission based on their gut. This entire mechanism of pre-authorization is a highly calculated risk management system, and it's built on decades of institutional trust.
So there is a structure to the Twilight Zone.
A rigid one, ironically. The intelligence architecture relies on heavily layered contingency plans and strict cultural codes.
How does that work in practice?
Well, senior officials establish predefined, pre-delegated thresholds of action long before a specific crisis ever occurs.
Oh, I see.
So while the operative on the ground in Istanbul appears to be acting autonomously in the dark, they are actually operating within a highly refined, deeply internalized matrix of rules.
They know exactly where the lines are drawn.
Yes, they are constantly reading subtle environmental cues, communicating back through coded channels, and evaluating the risk. The UK resolves this tension not by eliminating the gray zone, but by heavily institutionalizing it.
That's a great way to phrase it.
They expect proactive initiative, but that initiative is strictly bound by an understanding of strategic consequence.
So the safety net isn't necessarily like a physical backup team sitting in a van down the street. The safety net is the rigorous psychological and institutional conditioning of the operative themselves. They are trusted to push the envelope right up to the microscopic edge of disaster, precisely because they've been trained to know exactly what the edge looks like.
Exactly right. And that specific breed of institutional trust, that deeply ingrained culture of autonomy paired with absolute precision, is not something you can just invent in a boardroom overnight.
No, of course not.
It requires generations of institutional memory. To truly comprehend how British intelligence operates today, you have to trace its lineage back to the vast, complex machinery of the British Empire.
Which brings us to the historical roots of this influence. Whitmore makes the argument that the British Empire wasn't just a military and economic superpower. It was fundamentally the world's first truly global intelligence ecosystem.
Yes. If you look at the late 19th century, the British realized that maintaining control over a sprawling, incredibly diverse global empire could no longer be achieved through sheer military conquest or territorial garrisoning alone.
It was just too big.
Far too big. The British Army simply wasn't large enough to physically control every square mile of the empire by force. They had to pivot.
And what did they pivot to?
The true imperial currency shifted from troops and artillery to information and local leverage.
The book spends significant time on the Indian Intelligence Bureau, which was formally created in 1887. And reading the mechanics of how they operated is fascinating.
It's an incredible case study.
They weren't just gathering generic reports. They were engaged in a massive, nuanced operation of social mapping.
It was an early masterclass in asymmetrical information warfare. The Indian subcontinent was a mosaic of different languages, religions, political factions, and princely states.
It was incredibly complex.
So the British intelligence officers had to master local dialects. And not just to speak them, but to understand the cultural idioms and historical grievances of the people they were monitoring.
They needed deep cultural fluency.
Exactly. They built sprawling networks of local informants, utilized double agents to infiltrate anti-colonial movements, and heavily relied on counterintelligence to preempt uprisings before they ever materialized into armed conflict.
But the infrastructure wasn't just land-based human intelligence. Because Britain controlled the oceans, they practically owned the global communications network of the time.
The telegraph lines.
Yes. Whitmore details how their naval supremacy allowed them to establish maritime listening posts at key geopolitical choke points, places like Singapore, Malta, and Gibraltar.
Strategic bottlenecks.
Right. Long before the concept of modern signals intelligence even existed, the British were actively intercepting transoceanic telegraph cables and early radio communications. They were essentially reading the mail of the world.
They established a global nervous system, and the critical lesson they learned during the imperial era was how to manage incredibly volatile, hostile environments with a light but undeniably firm hand.
The soft touch.
Yes, they learned the immense strategic value of cultural empathy. You cannot manipulate a population or a political faction if you do not intimately understand what motivates them, what they fear, and how they communicate.
So fast forward to the mid-20th century, the geopolitical reality shifts. The British Empire officially dissolves. They lose the territorial control.
The map changes completely.
But Whitmore points out something crucial. That vast, entrenched intelligence network didn't just pack up its files and vanish into the history books. It adapted.
It evolved from a mechanism of imperial control into a mechanism of global survival.
Right. You had this massive cadre of former colonial officers who possessed incredibly deep linguistic skills, cultural knowledge, and decades of experience in manipulating local politics.
You don't just fire those people.
Exactly. They simply transition into the modern intelligence services. Since the UK could no longer project power through territorial dominance or massive military deployments, they completely shifted their strategy towards soft power and covert diplomacy.
And that transition is most visibly, or rather invisibly, demonstrated in their masterful use of diplomatic cover. In the post-empire world, embassies and consulates transformed into the absolute nerve centers for this silent empire.
And the tradecraft here is so far removed from the cinematic spy in a trench coat hiding in a dark alleyway. These operatives are hiding in plain sight.
They wear suits, not trench coats.
Right. They are operating as trade attachés or cultural exchange officers or agricultural liaisons. They use the highly formalized, incredibly rigid protocol of international diplomacy as a mask.
Diplomacy provides the perfect alibi for access. As a cultural officer, your official stated job is to cultivate relationships with local journalists, host academics, and interact with government officials.
It's literally your job description to ask questions.
Precisely. You have a legitimate reason to be asking questions and building networks.
Whitmore shares that incredible specific example of a British embassy operating in a Southeast Asian nation during a period of intense regional instability.
Oh, that's a perfect illustration.
If you looked at the official embassy calendar, it was just a relentless schedule of polite cultural exchange programs, art exhibitions, and trade facilitation meetings. But Whitmore details what was actually happening beneath that polished veneer.
The dual-track operation.
Exactly. While the ambassador's upstairs pouring tea for a local minister, the intelligence officers operating undercover are using that exact same meeting to quietly track subtle shifts in the host nation's economic policy.
Shifts that might indicate a clandestine military expansion, for example.
Right. And simultaneously, they are using the technical infrastructure of the embassy itself to actively intercept the radio communications and data streams of foreign operatives from competing nations who are operating in the same city.
All from the basement of the embassy.
All while maintaining the absolute facade of being gracious, benign hosts.
What's fascinating here is the sheer psychological duality of that existence. We talked about the tension of the pre-authorization zone earlier, but the tension of diplomatic cover is arguably heavier because it's...
They never get to drop the act.
Exactly. These operatives are blending genuine hospitality with relentless predatory surveillance.
You know, I was trying to find an analogy for this while reading, and it reminds me of a two-way mirror in an interrogation room, but applied to a social setting.
Oh, I like that.
From the outside, the guests at the embassy just see a reflection of their own diplomatic interactions. They see the smiles, the handshakes, the cultural exchange.
It's a lovely evening.
But behind the glass, in the exact same moment, the operative is analyzing every microexpression. They are cross-referencing names, cataloging vulnerabilities, and mapping out leverage points.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Right. How does a human being manage that psychological burden? You have to genuinely connect with the person sitting across from you to gain their trust, all while mentally calculating exactly how to exploit them.
It requires a profound, almost unnatural psychological calibration. And this is where that imperial legacy comes back into play. The UK's historical global presence has ingrained a level of cultural empathy into their operational training that is incredibly difficult to replicate.
It's not something you can learn in a classroom.
No, it's the art of soft manipulation. They are trained to turn a casual, seemingly innocuous conversation at a diplomatic reception into a quiet, tactical battlefield.
Wow.
In this environment, what is not said is often more important than what is spoken. It's about reading the unspoken fears, decoding behavioral tics, and subtly introducing ideas so that the target eventually acts on them, fully believing the idea was their own.
So we've explored the philosophy and we've established how the UK built this global web to gather intelligence through cultural immersion and precision. But gathering information is only half the battle.
It's what you do with it that counts.
Right. The true absolute test of this philosophy, the crucible where this intelligence had to be weaponized to literally save the nation from an existential threat, was World War II.
Absolutely. The Second World War is where the theoretical doctrine of the Silent Empire was forced to prove its ultimate worth. And the epicenter of that proof was the legendary code-breaking operation at Bletchley Park.
The Ultra program. We have to talk about Ultra. And specifically, we need to talk about the mechanisms behind it, because the story of Alan Turing and the cracking of the German Enigma code is famous. But Whitmore's analysis of how they utilize that intelligence is where the real revelation lies.
Let's briefly touch on the mechanical reality of Enigma, just because it contextualizes the achievement.
Sure, lay it out for us.
The German Enigma machine wasn't just a simple substitution cipher. It was a complex electromechanical rotor cipher machine. Every time an operator pressed a key, the rotors would turn, changing the electrical pathway.
So it's constantly shifting.
Yes. This meant that pressing the letter A might output a G the first time, but if you pressed A again, it might output an X.
And the Germans changed the starting settings of those rotors and the plugboard connections on the front of the machine every single day at midnight,
generating approximately 159 quintillion possible combinations. The German High Command believed it was mathematically impregnable.
which is why they trusted it with everything.
They used it to direct everything from the Luftwaffe bombing runs to the movements of the devastating U-boat wolf packs in the Atlantic.
Enter Bletchley Park and Turing's bomb machine. And what's crucial to understand here, and Whitmore emphasizes this heavily, is that Turing didn't build a machine to just blindly brute force 159 quintillion combinations.
That would have taken centuries.
Exactly. He built a machine based on logical deduction. The bomb worked by finding cribs, which are pieces of predicted plain text, like a daily weather report or a standardized military greeting.
Heil Hitler, things like that.
Right. And then it used massive arrays of rotating drums to mechanically eliminate the mathematical impossibilities. It didn't search for the right answer. It rapidly discarded the wrong ones until only the truth remained.
It was a monumental technical triumph. But, as Whitmore argues so effectively, the technological breakthrough of reading the German High Command's mail was really only the beginning of the problem.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, a bit harrowing, because once the British intelligence community possessed this godlike capability, once they could read the exact operational orders of the Axis forces, they faced a terrifying dilemma.
A moral and strategic nightmare.
They didn't just act on every piece of information. The operational restraint they demonstrated is staggering to comprehend.
It is what we might call the absolute agony of precision.
Agony is the perfect word, because if you intercept a message saying a German U-boat is going to sink a specific British passenger or supply ship at a specific coordinate, the natural human instinct is to immediately send the Royal Navy to destroy the U-boat and save your people.
Of course.
But the British commanders deliberately chose not to. They actively allowed certain German operations to proceed, they allowed Allied ships to be sunk, and they allowed troops to be ambushed.
Because if you act immediately and perfectly on every single intercept, the German High Command isn't stupid. They will look at the statistical anomaly of the British, always knowing exactly where they are, and they will immediately realize their impregnable Enigma code has been compromised.
And if they realize that, they change the encryption system entirely.
And the Allies go completely blind again, potentially losing the entire war.
So the British made the excruciating calculus that protecting the source of the intelligence, protecting the secret of Ultra itself, was fundamentally more important than any short-term tactical victory or the preservation of those specific lives.
That is the ultimate, unfiltered manifestation of the Silent Empire philosophy: restraint over reaction. But when they did choose to act on the intelligence, it was with surgical, devastating precision.
Give us an example.
Look at the Battle of the Atlantic. The U-boats were strangling the supply line from North America to Britain. Britain was starving. Using the decrypted Ultra intercepts, they didn't just send warships blindly into the ocean.
They didn't just charge in.
No, they used complex statistical analysis to surgically alter the routes of the merchant convoys. They essentially threaded the needle, weaving heavy, slow-moving supply ships right through the invisible gaps between the deadly U-boat wolf packs.
They're incredible.
They turned a chaotic fight for oceanic survival into a meticulously calculated mathematical equation.
But the UK didn't just use this intelligence defensively to avoid attacks. They weaponized it to actively construct massive illusions. And that leads us to the pinnacle of British wartime deception, Operation Fortitude.
The D-Day deception operation. It remains arguably the greatest masterpiece of psychological orchestration in military history.
Think about the sheer audacity of the objective. The Allies are preparing for the largest amphibious invasion in human history at Normandy. If the German armored divisions are waiting for them on the beaches, the invasion fails, the war drags on for years, and millions more die.
The stakes couldn't be higher.
So the objective of Fortitude was to completely convince Adolf Hitler and the German High Command that the invasion was actually going to happen hundreds of miles away at Pas-Calais. British intelligence essentially decided to create a Hollywood-scale illusion, but with the fate of the free world riding on it.
And the mechanisms they used to build this illusion were incredibly diverse.
They created an entirely phantom army group, the first U.S. Army group, and placed it under the command of General George Patton.
Because they knew the Germans feared and respected Patton more than any other Allied general.
Exactly. But they didn't just put a name on a piece of paper. They physically built the illusion. They constructed thousands of inflatable canvas tanks and plywood artillery pieces and positioned them in the fields of southeastern England, exactly where German reconnaissance flights would photograph them.
But visual deception alone wouldn't hold up to deep scrutiny. They needed an electronic footprint.
Right, because a fake tank doesn't transmit radio signals, so they generated massive amounts of fake radio traffic. And the detail here is astonishing to me. Every telegraph operator has a unique rhythm to their typing. It's called a fist.
German intelligence knew the fists of specific Allied units.
So British intelligence had operators flawlessly mimicking the typing cadence of whole divisions that simply didn't exist. They were on the radios, complaining about the weather, requesting rations, simulating the mundane logistical chatter of a massive army preparing to cross the channel.
It's brilliant.
But I want to ask you about the most critical element of this, because visual props and radio noise aren't enough to fool a paranoid high command.
Yeah.
How do they actually deliver the lie directly into Hitler's ear?
They delivered it through the double-cross system. And this is where the philosophy of psychological manipulation reaches its zenith. British counterintelligence, MI5, had quietly captured almost every single German spy operating within the UK.
Almost all of them.
Instead of executing them, they offered them a choice. Work for us or face the firing squad. They turned them into double agents.
And they used these turned agents to feed a carefully curated, meticulously timed stream of misinformation directly back to their handlers in Berlin. But how do you keep the Germans from realizing their agents have been compromised? If an agent suddenly starts sending completely fabricated intelligence, wouldn't Berlin get suspicious immediately?
This is where the fusion of technology and human psychology is so brilliant. They kept the deception from unraveling because the lies were intricately, beautifully layered with absolute truth.
Truth they got from Ultra.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they were reading the German communications through Ultra, the British handlers knew exactly what the German intelligence officers expected to hear, what they feared, and what their internal biases were.
So they didn't just invent a story out of thin air. They confirmed Hitler's existing paranoia.
Precisely. Hitler always believed the attack would come at Pas-de-Calais because it was the shortest route across the Channel. The double-cross agents simply fed him the evidence his own mind desperately wanted to believe.
Confirmation bias on a geopolitical scale.
They built a legend of trust over years by feeding the Germans true but harmless or slightly delayed intelligence. So when the critical moment came, and the agents reported that Normandy was just a diversion and the real attack was coming at Calais, the German High Command swallowed it whole.
And it worked.
It worked perfectly. They kept vital panzer divisions sitting in reserve for weeks after D-Day, waiting for a phantom army that was never going to arrive.
It's the ultimate triumph of precision over brute force. They functionally won the battle for the beaches of Normandy before a single Allied soldier stepped out of a landing craft, entirely by controlling the narrative inside the minds of the enemy command.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how this fusion of high-tech interception, the bomb machines, and profound human deception, the double-cross system, perfectly set the stage for the next era of conflict. The strategies developed at Bletchley Park didn't end in 1945.
They became the foundational architecture for the Cold War.
Right, you transition into an era where direct conflict between superpowers means nuclear annihilation, so the entire war goes underground.
Whitmore touches on how those double-cross principles continued seamlessly. You look at an agent like Garbo, operating out of Madrid during the war, who fabricated an entire fictitious network of subagents to feed the Germans lies. That exact same blueprint of psychological manipulation and fabricated reality was weaponized against the Soviet KGB for the next 4 decades.
But while the Cold War was largely a war of shadows and ideology, British intelligence occasionally had to apply this philosophy to sudden, conventional kinetic conflicts.
Like actual shooting wars.
Yes. And Whitmore highlights the Malvinas or Falklands conflict in 1982 as a primary case study of how this doctrine operates on a modern, remote battlefield.
Let's really set the scene for the listener here because the logistics are staggering. It is 1982. The UK is fighting a war over a cluster of islands in the South Atlantic. It is completely remote, it's freezing, and it's rugged.
A terrible place to fight a war.
The British Naval Task Force is operating thousands of miles away from their home ports, sailing into incredibly hostile, heavily defended waters against a well-equipped Argentine military. It is a logistical nightmare.
In that unforgiving environment, brute force alone was not going to guarantee a victory. The British task force was highly vulnerable. This is where signals intelligence, or SIGINT, became the absolute defining force multiplier.
How did they deploy it?
The British deployed heavily modified ships, aircraft, and rapid response listening posts specifically designed to intercept Argentine radio and radar chatter.
And the mechanics of this are gritty. We aren't talking about analysts sitting in a comfortable climate-controlled office in London.
No, it's not at all.
We are talking about teams of specialized linguists and cryptographers crammed into the freezing, violently pitching hulls of warships. They were using high-frequency direction finding to triangulate signals bouncing off the ionosphere.
While under fire.
Yes. They are wearing headphones for 20 hours a day, trying to discern Argentine tactical orders through heavy atmospheric static and combat interference, and they are actively breaking, adapting ciphers in near real time while under the constant threat of Exocet missile strikes.
And the flow of that information was uniquely streamlined. Whitmore breaks down the Battle of Goose Green as the perfect tactical example of this.
Explain how that worked, because the integration of the intelligence with the actual combat troops is fascinating.
At Goose Green, the British SIGINT teams were intercepting the VHF communications of the Argentine field units. Because they were breaking the tactical ciphers locally on the ships, the intelligence didn't have to be sent all the way back to London for analysis.
That saves precious time.
Exactly. It was routed almost instantly to the tactical commanders on the ground. The British commanders literally knew where the Argentine patrols were ordered to move before the patrols had even begun to march.
So they allowed the British infantry, along with the Special Air Service and Special Boat Service, to perfectly anticipate movements and lay devastating, highly localized ambushes.
They took the inherent chaos and friction of remote warfare and transformed it into a tightly choreographed surgical operation.
Wow.
When the intercepted chatter revealed a localized supply shortage or a moment of command confusion, the British forces didn't just attack the main line blindly. They tailored their artillery fire, their psychological operations, and their troop movements to exploit exactly that microscopic vulnerability. It is the philosophy of precision applied to mud and blood combat.
So what does this all mean for the concept of military power? To me, reading the Malvinas section proved that the old metric of counting tanks and artillery shells is obsolete.
It absolutely is.
In modern warfare, the side with the best hearing, the side that can process data faster, almost always beats the side with the biggest guns. You don't need a massive, overwhelming infantry charge if your SIGINT tells you exactly where the enemy's flank will be exposed 10 minutes from now.
It is the ultimate leverage. The ability to intercept, analyze, and action information with that level of speed minimizes friendly casualties and maximizes kinetic impact.
It's incredibly effective.
But, as Whitmore profoundly notes, while the Malvinas demonstrated how this philosophy operates on a remote, conventional battlefield against a uniformed military, the true and arguably most agonizing test of the Silent Empire occurred much closer to home.
Right. We have to pivot now from the open ocean to an entirely different kind of battlefield. We are looking at the deeply sensitive, incredibly complex theater of Northern Ireland during the Troubles.
A very difficult chapter.
And I want to be clear to you listening here. As we discuss this, we are looking purely analytically at the intelligence mechanisms, the tradecraft, and the specific ethical dilemmas detailed by Whitmore in his text. We are examining the machinery of the conflict.
The operational shift required here was profound. British intelligence had to rapidly transition from foreign espionage and open warfare to domestic urban counterinsurgency.
They were operating within their own borders.
Exactly. And the calculus of domestic intelligence is entirely different. If you are fighting a conventional war, you can bomb a bridge or shell a bunker. If you are operating in a suburban neighborhood in Belfast, applying a heavy, overt military hand risks completely fracturing the social fabric.
You risk violently alienating the very civilian communities you are purportedly trying to protect.
The entire surveillance methodology had to be reinvented. You can't use satellite arrays and naval warships to monitor a terraced house in a residential neighborhood.
No, that won't work at all.
Operatives had to develop tradecraft that allowed them to blend seamlessly into mundane, everyday life. Whitmore details the mechanics of what they call pattern of life analysis.
Which requires agonizing patience.
It really does.
It's not about kicking down doors in a dramatic raid. It's about establishing covert observation posts, or OPs. Intelligence officers would be smuggled into the dusty attic of a sympathetic or coerced resident in the dead of night.
Just waiting.
They would sit in the freezing dark for weeks at a time, looking through a missing brick or a gap in the roof tiles, staring at a single doorway across the street. They are logging every single time the target leaves, who comes to visit, what time the lights go out.
Every mundane detail.
Exactly. They are decoding the casual, coded language used in local pub conversations. They are accumulating thousands of tiny, seemingly insignificant data points to build a comprehensive map of insurgent networks.
But gathering the data visually is only the surface level. This raises an important question, and it is the darkest chapter of Whitmore's analysis: the moral cost of maintaining human informant networks.
Yeah, this part of the book was intense.
To truly understand the internal dynamics of the paramilitary groups, the British intelligence services had to recruit individuals who were deeply embedded within those violent organizations.
And the informants in Northern Ireland lived in a terrifying, claustrophobic, liminal space. They were trapped between the survival instinct of working with the intelligence services and the absolute certainty of lethal retribution if they were discovered by their own groups to be betraying them.
And the psychological burden didn't just rest on the informant. Consider the operative, the handler.
The handler has it rough, too.
You have a British intelligence officer who is forced to navigate a daily, soul-crushing ethical labyrinth. They have to weigh the macro goal of national security and preventing bombings against the micro-reality of eroding civil liberties, intruding into profoundly private lives, and systematically manipulating family and kinship ties.
The handler is actively fostering a pervasive atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust within the community.
That is the central paradox of domestic counterinsurgency that Whitmore outlines. To protect a society from widespread, systemic violence, the intelligence apparatus felt compelled to quietly dissolve the foundational trust that holds a community together.
And trust is the essential glue of any society.
And the specific nature of covert informant-based surveillance is highly corrosive to that glue.
It creates a tragic, almost unbearable irony. Whitmore discusses situations where intelligence services had highly placed, incredibly valuable informants within paramilitary structures. To protect the cover of those informants, to keep them alive so they could continue providing intelligence about future large-scale attacks, the intelligence agencies sometimes had to look the other way when those informants were involved in lesser crimes.
They had to make awful choices.
They occasionally had to withhold justice from victims. If you arrest the informant for a crime today, you blow their cover, and you lose the intelligence stream that might prevent a massive car bomb next week.
It is the classic philosophical trolley problem, but brought to life in the grim reality of a modern urban conflict.
It really is. And for you listening, I want you to genuinely ponder the weight of that moral calculus. When we talk about the Silent Empire, it's easy to get caught up in the intellectual brilliance of the spycraft and the strategic victories.
It sounds so slick on paper.
Right. But maintaining that silence, prioritizing that cold precision, demands an incredibly heavy, often invisible ethical price paid by the individuals on the ground.
And those agonizing lessons learned in the streets of Belfast didn't just fade away when the conflict ended. Whitmore argues that the urban counterinsurgency doctrines forged there became the foundational blueprint for the global, largely invisible war on terror that has defined the first quarter of the 21st century.
Because the nature of the threat mutated entirely. When we talk about modern counterterrorism, the visibility of the adversary is practically zero. We aren't hunting massed armor formations on a European plain, and we aren't just dealing with localized urban paramilitaries. The hunt today is for decentralized sleeper cells.
Individuals who are specifically trained to generate no friction.
None at all.
They move into a city, they get mundane jobs, they pay their taxes, and they blend flawlessly into the background noise of the community for years, waiting for a single operational directive.
So how do you find them? It's the ultimate search for a single needle in a global haystack. And you don't find that needle through brute force, you find it through the microscopic analysis of digital anomalies.
The digital breadcrumbs.
Whitmore details how modern intelligence hunts for the slight, almost imperceptible deviations in a pattern of life. A sudden, unexplained shift in a daily travel route tracked by a cell phone tower. An obscure, tiny financial transaction routed through 3 different shell companies in varying jurisdictions.
A brief blip of encrypted, heavily masked chatter on a dark web forum that matches a linguistic profile.
But the sheer volume of that global data is incomprehensible. The UK, despite its expertise, simply does not possess the demographic size or the sovereign reach to monitor the entire globe alone.
And this brings us to the modern structural genius of their influence, the architecture of the Five Eyes system.
The Five Eyes. The intelligence alliance comprising the UK, the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand.
An alliance originating from the deep institutional trust forged during the code-breaking days of WWII. This intelligence-sharing ecosystem is the primary mechanism that allows the United Kingdom to continue punching massively above its geopolitical weight class in the modern era.
Let's break down how that ecosystem functionally operates, because it's essentially a massive pooling of global resources.
Geographically and technologically, it creates a seamless matrix. Through this alliance, the UK gains direct access to Canadian signals interception capabilities, monitoring the vast expanses of the Arctic and Northern Hemisphere.
They tap into Australian regional expertise.
Yes, and listening posts covering the entire Asia-Pacific theater. And most importantly, they integrate with the overwhelming technological might, the massive server farms, and the comprehensive satellite coverage of the United States.
They share access to the undersea fiber optic cables that carry the world's internet traffic. Intelligence gathered by an Australian operative in Jakarta is analyzed by an algorithm in Maryland and actioned by an operative in London, all in real time. It completely transcends national borders.
And the primary battleground they are monitoring has shifted completely from physical territory to the digital realm. Cyberspace is the new frontier. But what Whitmore emphasizes is that the UK has ported its historical philosophy of precision directly into this new domain.
That actually brings up something I found fascinating in the reading regarding how different nations approach cyber warfare. When we think of cyber attacks, we usually think of the loud brute force events, a massive ransomware attack that completely crashes a national healthcare grid, or a hack that wipes the data of a major corporation.
The digital sledgehammers.
Those attacks wave a giant digital flag and practically invite immediate, heavy-handed international retaliation. But the UK approaches cyberspace with a totally different doctrine. Whitmore calls it stealthy penetration.
They are navigating the digital landscape with the exact same mindset as that operative placing the bug in Istanbul. It is about an artist's precision, not a sledgehammer's force.
Let's look at the specific mechanism Whitmore details regarding how the UK defends its national infrastructure. He describes a scenario where sophisticated hostile actors were actively attempting to penetrate a critical UK network. Now, the standard response would be to immediately block the attacking IP addresses, raise the firewalls, and aggressively counterattack the adversary's servers.
Which alerts the attacker that you have detected them, prompting them to adapt and return with a different unknown method.
Exactly. So British cyber operatives didn't do that. Instead of slamming the door, they essentially built a fake hallway. They introduced incredibly complex false data streams. They utilized digital honeypots.
It's so clever.
When the attacker breached the outer layer, the defenders seamlessly redirected the malicious code into a quarantined sandbox environment that perfectly mirrored the actual system.
They fed the attackers deceptive fingerprints and fake telemetry.
Right. They made the malware believe it was successfully infecting the system and extracting critical data, when in reality, it was downloading highly curated garbage.
They were wasting the attacker's time.
By doing this, the British operatives quietly misled the attackers into misallocating massive amounts of time, server space, and operational resources into a complete digital dead end. Furthermore, By letting the malware operate in the sandbox, the defenders could reverse engineer its code, study its behavior, and definitively trace its origin point.
They completely neutralized a severe national security threat without the attacker ever realizing they were being played. It leaves absolutely no trace of attribution, and it maintains total silence.
It's the digital equivalent of the double-cross system from WWII, feeding the adversary exactly what they expect to see to control their behavior. But this elegant manipulation leads us directly into the final and most volatile frontier Whitmore discusses: artificial intelligence.
Because AI is radically altering the physics of this silent empire.
AI is currently acting as the ultimate force multiplier for these intelligence agencies. Remember the search for the digital needle in the haystack? AI algorithms can crunch billions of disparate data points, analyze global metadata, cross-reference financial records, and isolate those microscopic digital anomalies in milliseconds.
A task that would take human analysts lifetimes to complete.
But Whitmore introduces a profound warning here. While AI is a force multiplier for the state, it simultaneously democratizes massive destructive power. The tools to manipulate reality are no longer locked behind the classified doors of Bletchley Park or the NSA.
Anyone can use them now.
AI allows non-state actors, decentralized terrorist groups, or even rogue individuals to generate highly convincing deepfakes to manipulate elections, to launch automated polymorphic cyber assaults that adapt to firewalls in real time, and eventually to deploy autonomous weapon systems.
It lowers the barrier to entry for global disruption to near zero. And this creates a massive structural tension within the intelligence community. There's a constant tug of war between the ruthless, cold efficiency of an AI algorithm and the absolute undeniable necessity of human intuition.
To play devil's advocate for a second, if an AI can analyze 1 million encrypted text messages and definitively flag a conversation as an imminent terror threat with 99% accuracy, based on a complex mathematical algorithm, why do we need human intuition slowing down the response?
Because the algorithm lacks context. Mathematics cannot comprehend the nuance of human irrationality, sarcasm, cultural idioms, or bluffing. If a machine flags a target based purely on statistical correlation, how do you know it isn't completely misinterpreting the cultural context of the conversation?
You don't.
You don't. And that is exactly why the UK's intelligence doctrine strongly insists that AI must be used to augment human judgment, never to replace it.
It goes back to what we discussed about Northern Ireland and the Southeast Asian embassies. Without the deep cultural empathy, the psychological insight, and the heavy ethical compass of a human operative, raw data is not just useless, it becomes actively dangerous noise.
The human element is irreplaceable.
It is the human mind that has to sit with the data and evaluate the moral cost of a strike, predict the long-term diplomatic fallout, and determine the exact, perfect strategic timing.
The machine can calculate the trajectory of the bullet, but only the human can decide if pulling the trigger serves the ultimate strategic goal, or if silence is the better weapon.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We are entering an era where artificial intelligence is making the invisible digital world increasingly noisy, chaotic, and completely flooded with manufactured misinformation.
A tidal wave of noise.
The battles of the future will be fought in oceans of synthetic data. When that happens, will the ultimate intelligence advantage belong to the supercomputers and the algorithms that can process the highest volume of information the fastest? Or, when the noise becomes deafening, will the true, enduring power ultimately belong to the human minds that know exactly when, where, and how to remain completely strategically silent?
To briefly synthesize everything we've explored in Whitmore's text today, what the Silent Empire masterfully reveals is that the UK's covert influence is not a series of isolated historical events. It is an unbroken evolutionary lineage of a specific philosophy. From the expansive, culturally nuanced informant networks of the imperial age to the agonizing mathematical restraint of Bletchley Park, the high-stakes data orchestration in the freezing waters of the Malvinas, the moral labyrinths of domestic surveillance, and the stealthy algorithmic manipulations of modern cyber warfare. It is a unifying foundational doctrine that continually proves one thing. True, lasting global power lies not in the sledgehammer's deafening destructive blow, but in the surgeon's exact invisible cut.
We've reached the end of this analysis. If this episode added value to your day, please leave a like, share it, and subscribe to Strategic Labs so we can keep deconstructing narratives. Remember to check the video description. See you in the next analysis.